The envelope hit the marble countertop like a slap. Not figuratively, my father actually slid it across the sleek glass table at my own housewarming party right between the caviar canapes and the Veuve Clicquot flutes, then leaned back as if he'd just proposed a toast. Bold black letters across the top, notice of intent to contest ownership and demand for immediate transfer. My mother Patricia smiled first, that small polished smile she always used when delivering something vicious wrapped in civility. Adrienne, my father Kenneth said, voice calm but edged, we need to talk seriously. You have 3 days to prepare to leave. Let's avoid dragging this through court. 200 guests, friends, business partners, Boston real estate insiders froze mid-conversation. Champagne glasses hovered untouched. The live jazz quartet on the balcony faltered notes hanging in the air. A few phones came out quietly recording. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind over the Charles River view behind me. I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled back, slow, deliberate. From my clutch, I pulled another envelope I'd kept ready for years and slid it right back across the table toward them. My father's face drained of color the moment he opened it. They had no idea I'd been waiting for this exact moment for the past 10 years. If you've ever had family turn a celebration into a battlefield over money or property, drop in the comments. What was the one moment that made you realize blood doesn't always mean loyalty? Hit like. If you're ready for the full story, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss how this ends. A few years earlier, my grandfather Theodore passed away after a long battle with heart disease. He had always been sharp even in his final months at Massachusetts General Hospital, where I drove him for every appointment and managed his daily medications. But it wasn't just the caregiving that earned me the loft. The real turning point came when my brother Garrett tried to push him into signing an equity loan against the property to fund his latest tech startup. Garrett had pitched it as a low-risk bridge during a family dinner, but I overheard enough to get suspicious. Theodore asked me to look over some preliminary documents Garrett had left on the kitchen table. When I checked the emails and listened to the recorded calls, Theodore had secretly saved ones where Garrett promised quick returns, but pressured him with, "If you don't help, I'll lose everything." I spotted the red flags. Garrett had already forged preliminary signatures on a couple of draft loan forms, thinking Theodore wouldn't notice the discrepancies. Theodore was furious but kept it quiet at first. He didn't confront Garrett directly. Instead, he met with his private attorney the next week and completely overhauled his estate plan. The Back Bay loft, his prized possession in one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods, was transferred to me outright through a revocable trust designation that became irrevocable upon his death, bypassing probate entirely. He structured it so the property vested in me immediately with clear language in the trust documents naming me the sole beneficiary for that asset. To protect against exactly what was happening now, Theodore added a strict non-contest clause to the residual trust he set up for the rest of the family. That trust held liquid assets, investments, bonds, a few rental properties split among my parents and Garrett. The clause was explicit: any beneficiary who directly or indirectly contested the trust provisions challenged title to the loft or supported such a challenge would forfeit their entire share. Massachusetts courts enforce these clauses when they're clear and unambiguous, as the appeals court had confirmed in cases extending them to trusts as well as wills. Theodore knew his family. He wanted to make sure no one could bully me out of what he'd deliberately given me. He even recorded one final family conversation at his bedside, where Garrett admitted under pressure, "If you don't help now, Grandpa, I'm done. Everything's gone." Theodore saved that audio file on a secure drive and gave me the only copy, telling me quietly, "Keep this safe, Adrienne. You might need it someday." I did for 10 long years. Meanwhile, my father Kenneth and mother Patricia had always favored Garrett. Every setback of his was just a rough patch: the failed ventures, the mounting debts from bad investments, the way he borrowed from friends and relatives without repaying. They dismissed my independence as stubbornness, and never acknowledged how much I'd sacrificed skipping vacations to stay close for Theodore's treatments, using my own savings to cover unexpected medical bills when insurance fell short. To them, Garrett was the one who deserved a fresh start, even though he was 33 and still cycling through one doomed idea after another. Now, with his latest startup collapsing under debt and creditors circling, Garrett needed quick collateral. The loft prime Back Bay location sweeping Charles River views concierge service and high-end finishes was perfect. He could leverage it for a massive bank loan or convert it into luxury short-term rentals, pulling in cash flow fast enough to keep his head above water. My parents saw the skyrocketing value Boston's luxury market had pushed Back Bay properties into the $8 million range for top-tier lofts, and convinced themselves it was fair to challenge the trust designation. They prepared the notice of intent to contest ownership, believing the non-contest clause wouldn't hold because Theodore had been influenced by illness in his final days. They timed it for my housewarming party, figuring the crowd of 200 would pressure me into backing down to avoid public embarrassment. They had no clue about the recordings, the PI reports I'd quietly compiled over the years, tracking Garrett's financial messes, or how meticulously I'd prepared to defend what was rightfully mine. My mother, Patricia, placed the envelope on the marble table with deliberate calm, sliding it toward me as if offering a cocktail napkin. The words, "Notice of intent to contest ownership and demand for immediate transfer," stared up in crisp black ink. Kenneth stood beside her, arms folded, delivering the explanation he'd clearly rehearsed. "This comes from our family attorney, Adrienne. It's based on an equitable family interest claim. Your grandfather's intent was always to keep major assets in the direct line. If necessary, we'll file to challenge title in probate court." Garrett leaned forward from his seat, voice low but carrying across the sudden hush. "The loft should go to the person who actually needs it. I've got a real opportunity here. If I can use it as collateral, I can turn things around fast." The room shifted. The jazz quartet on the balcony softened to background notes, almost apologetic. Champagne flutes remained suspended midair. A couple of my closest friends edged closer, one whispering, "Adrienne, what's going on?" Others farther back exchanged glances, phones slipping out discreetly to capture the moment. Servers froze near the bar trays, balanced but unmoving. The whispers spread outward in waves. First the inner circle, then the outer rings of business acquaintances and distant relatives. Someone muttered, "Is this for real?" Another laughed nervously, then stopped when no one joined in. I kept my gaze steady on my father. "Based on what legal authority exactly?" Kenneth tapped the envelope lightly. "The letter outlines a potential adverse claim rooted in family equitable redistribution. We've consulted counsel. This isn't about emotion, it's about fairness and what Theodore truly wanted before his illness clouded his judgment." It was a bluff dressed in legal jargon, the kind of pre-litigation demand that sounds intimidating on paper, but carries no immediate force without a court order. No sheriff, no eviction warrant, just words meant to pressure me into negotiating on the spot in front of everyone whose opinion might matter in Boston's tight-knit real estate circles. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I turned slightly and nodded toward the edge of the crowd. "Elena." Elena Morales stepped forward without hesitation. My best friend since college, now a sharp estate attorney, who had handled more contested trusts than most people see in a lifetime. She had been circulating quietly among the guests all evening. She carried a sealed manila envelope in one hand, professional but unhurried. When she reached the table, she set it down directly in front of Kenneth. "This was certified and delivered to your office today, Mr. Vaughn," she said evenly. "My firm received a copy for review. I thought you'd want to see it before the night goes any further." The shift in energy was immediate. Guests who had been whispering now fell silent, leaning in to watch. The jazz faded to near nothing. A server finally set down his tray with a soft clink that sounded deafening in the quiet. Patricia's smile faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of unease. Kenneth's hand hovered over the new envelope, fingers hesitating before he picked it up. Elena didn't wait for him to open it. She addressed the table, voice clear enough for the nearest clusters of guests to hear. The document references the sworn probate statement from Theodore Vaughn's estate. It confirms the revocable trust designation vesting the Back Bay property solely in Adrienne upon his death. More importantly, it includes the executed non-contest acknowledgement signed by all beneficiaries, including you, Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn, and Garrett. Garrett's face tightened. That's not... Elena continued without pause. The clause is unambiguous. Any attempt to contest title possession or beneficial ownership of the loft triggers forfeiture of trust distributions. Massachusetts law upholds these provisions when they are clearly drafted and voluntarily signed, as the appeals court has repeatedly affirmed. Patricia reached for Kenneth's arm, a silent signal. He opened the envelope slowly, eyes scanning the first page. Whatever he saw made his jaw set hard. The color that had drained earlier returned in patches of red along his neck. Guests exchanged looks, some shocked, some fascinated. One woman I recognized from a recent closing whispered to her husband, "This is better than reality TV." Another pulled out her phone again, recording openly now. The atmosphere had flipped from awkward surprise to something sharper, public scrutiny. No one was pretending this was private anymore. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap, watching their faces. Patricia tried to recover her voice, pitched just loud enough to carry. "This is a misunderstanding. Theodore was not in his right mind toward the end. We only want what's fair for the family." Elena met her eyes directly. "Fairness isn't the standard here. The trust documents are. And the acknowledgement you signed says otherwise." Kenneth finally spoke, voice lower than before. "We can discuss this privately later." But it was too late for privacy. The room had become the courtroom. Every guest within earshot now understood exactly what was at stake, not just a property dispute, but a deliberate attempt to override a dead man's clear wishes right in the middle of my celebration. The jazz quartet started up again, tentative at first, then steadier, but the spell was broken. No one was raising glasses anymore. They were watching, waiting for the next move. Elena didn't let the silence linger. She opened the envelope with precise movements and began reading aloud, her voice carrying across the table and to the nearest guests who had edged closer. "This is a certified copy of the sworn probate statement from Theodore Vaughn's estate, filed and accepted in Suffolk County Probate and Family Court. In it, Kenneth Vaughn explicitly acknowledged that the Back Bay loft was designated solely to Adrienne Vaughn via irrevocable trust provisions effective upon Theodore's death. Kenneth also signed the non-contest clause attached to the residual family trust." She paused for emphasis, then continued with the key paragraph. "Any beneficiary who contests title or supports contest shall forfeit distribution entirely." Garrett snatched the page from her hand, eyes darting over the lines. His face flushed as he read it twice, then shoved it toward Kenneth. "This can't be right. Grandpa was on heavy medication. How could he even understand what he was signing?" Patricia stepped in quickly, her voice pitched to sound reasonable amid the growing murmurs. "The clause isn't fair. Theodore wasn't in his right mind toward the end. We have medical records showing confusion. This was never his true intent." Kenneth cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "We believe the clause doesn't apply to direct parents. Garrett convinced me we have a strong equitable interest argument, family redistribution based on need. The trust was meant to support all of us, not just one person." I watched their faces as the words landed. My father's usual confidence cracked. His eyes flicked to the guests now openly staring. My mother gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Garrett looked from the paper to me, then back, realization dawning that they had walked straight into the trap Theodore had set years ago. The room buzzed louder. A woman in a black dress near the bar whispered loudly enough to carry, "Is this really happening at a housewarming?" Her companion replied, Drama family style better than any show. Several more phones were out now, not even pretending to be discreet. A couple of my business contacts exchanged glances, one shaking his head slowly. Elena addressed them directly, calm but firm. The clause is enforceable under Massachusetts law. The Uniform Probate Code and appeals court rulings confirm that voluntary non-contest provisions in trusts are upheld when clear and unambiguous. You signed it knowingly after probate closed. No duress, no incapacity claim was raised at the time. Attempting to challenge now triggers automatic forfeiture of your shares in the residual trust. She flipped to the next page. The trust holds approximately $900,000 in liquid assets, investments, bonds, and income-producing properties divided among the three beneficiaries. Contest means zero distribution for each of you. The remainder goes to the alternate charitable beneficiaries, Theodore named Veterans Housing Programs in Boston and a local library foundation. Garrett laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. You're bluffing. We can fight this in court. Elena met his gaze. You can try, but the clause includes support of contest, any assistance including providing documents or testimony. The sworn acknowledgement you all signed waives the right to challenge without penalty. Courts rarely invalidate these when evidence shows voluntary execution. Patricia's voice rose slightly. This is extortion. Theodore manipulated the documents when he was ill. I spoke then, quiet but clear. Grandpa was lucid enough to record every conversation. He knew exactly what he was doing and why. Kenneth's hand trembled as he turned another page. The color had fully left his face. He stared at the signatures, his own, Patricia's, Garrett's, right there in black ink, binding them to the consequences they now faced. Guests were no longer whispering. Conversations had stopped entirely. The jazz had gone silent. One server finally moved to clear a plate, the clink of china echoing like a gunshot. A man I recognized from a recent closing deal leaned over to his wife. This is why you get everything in writing. Garrett tried one last push. We just want what's fair. The loft is worth $8 million. We deserve a share. Elena shook her head. Fairness ended when you signed the acknowledgement. The trust language is explicit, and Massachusetts courts protect settler intent above all else. My mother looked around at the faces, watching friends, colleagues, strangers who now knew every detail. Her polished composure cracked. Tears welled but didn't fall. Kenneth set the papers down slowly, as if they burned. The high point of the party had become its undoing. They had come to humiliate me in public, thinking the crowd would force my hand. Instead, the crowd witnessed their own trap closing. No one spoke for a long moment. The tension hung thick, broken only by the distant hum of Boston traffic far below the balcony. With most of the guests gone, the loft felt suddenly vast and quiet. A handful of close friends lingered near the balcony, chatting in low tones, but the main table was empty except for scattered glasses and the stack of documents Elena had left behind. I had scheduled Victor Lang to arrive at this exact moment after the spectacle, when the family was still reeling, but before they could regroup in private. Victor walked in through the private elevator, leather folder under one arm, expression as neutral as ever. He was the trust administration counsel Theodore had appointed years ago, a man in his late 50s who spoke in measured sentences and never raised his voice. He set the folder on the table without ceremony and looked directly at Kenneth. I arranged this timing deliberately, Victor said. Adrienne wanted witnesses to any attempt at contest. The party provided them. Now that the initial move is on record publicly, let's address what came next. He opened the folder and slid a printed email chain across the surface. The subject line read, Mara Transition Agreement, Draft Understanding. No. That was wrong. It was my name, Adrienne Vaughn, forged at the bottom of a one-page statement claiming I had agreed in principle to transfer occupancy of the Back Bay loft to Garrett Vaughn by year-end in exchange for family harmony. Kenneth's eyes narrowed. This was an internal draft. Nothing formal. Victor tapped the page. You sent it to the trust office 2 days ago. Certified transmission. The office compared it against the specimen signature on file from the original probate acknowledgement. The discrepancy is obvious loop inconsistencies in the capital A, pressure variations in the signature stroke. Forensic document examination would confirm it, but even a lay review shows forgery. Patricia leaned over Kenneth's shoulder, voice tight. We were trying to facilitate a private resolution, no harm intended. Victor didn't blink. Sending falsified consent to a fiduciary institution is fraud under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 267, Section 1. Penalties include up to 10 years imprisonment if intent to defraud is proven. The trust administrator has already flagged it for review. Garrett shifted uncomfortably. It was just to speed things up. We thought she'd sign eventually. Victor pulled out the next set of documents, transcripts, and audio files time-stamped over the past decade. Adrienne has maintained a record since Theodore first expressed concern about Garrett's financial patterns. Here's the audio from Theodore himself, dated 2 months before his death. He describes discovering Garrett's attempt to forge preliminary signatures on an equity loan application. Theodore states clearly, Garrett tried to slip in a fake endorsement. Adrienne caught it. That's why the trust is structured this way. He played a short clip, my grandfather's voice weakened but unmistakable. If they push again, use this. I won't let them take from her. Garrett's jaw clenched. That's out of context. Victor continued. Private investigator reports from the last 8 years document Garrett's debt history: defaulted loans, unpaid vendors, 3 bankruptcies filed under different LLCs. There are also archived emails between Kenneth and Patricia discussing how to approach the loft issue once the market peaks. One from last year. Garrett needs the equity. We can argue undue influence on Theodore. My mother tried to interrupt. Those were private conversations. Private until subpoenaed. Victor cut in. The trust administrator has authority to investigate potential breaches. This chain-forged email prior forgery pattern coordinated planning constitutes direct and indirect contest plus support thereof. The non-contest clause is triggered. Kenneth rubbed his temple. We can withdraw the notice. Call it a misunderstanding. Victor shook his head. Too late. The submission to the trust office created a formal record. Withdrawal doesn't erase the act. The clause is self-executing upon evidence of contest. The administrator will suspend distributions pending final determination, and given the forgery, final enforcement is likely. I stayed silent, letting Victor lay it out. My parents and brother had spent years assuming I wouldn't fight back, assuming their version of family loyalty would override paperwork. But I had waited for the moment they made it public, when their bluff couldn't be retracted quietly. Witnesses from the party had seen the initial demand. Now the fraud evidence would be impossible to deny. Patricia looked at me for the first time since the envelope exchange. You planned this? I met her eyes. No. I prepared for it. There's a difference. Garrett stood abruptly. This is bullshit. We're family. Victor closed the folder. Family signed the clause. Family sent the forged document. The trust doesn't distinguish. He gathered his papers. I'll be filing the suspension notice tomorrow. Distributions halt immediately. You have the cure period to retract all claims and withdraw any filings, but the forgery alone may bar cure. Kenneth stared at the table, defeated. Patricia's hand trembled on his arm. Garrett walked to the window back, turned fists clenched. The loft, once filled with celebration, now held only the weight of consequences they had invited. The next morning, the concierge desk buzzed my private line at exactly 8:15. Ms. Vaughn, your brother is in the lobby with a mail courier and is requesting civil standby assistance to receive personal correspondence. He insists on updating the mailbox label as well. I was already dressed and had the deed copy and trust summary folder ready on the entry table. Tell security I'm coming down. No access beyond the lobby until I arrive. The elevator ride to the main floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, Garrett stood at the concierge counter in a navy blazer that looked hastily chosen, a freelance mail courier beside him, holding a clipboard. Two condo security officers flanked the desk, uniformed professional hands resting near radios. Garrett's face was set in forced calm, but his eyes flicked toward me the moment I stepped out. "Good morning, Adrienne," he said, voice pitched to sound reasonable in front of witnesses. "I'm just here to pick up mail addressed to me at this address. The courier needs to confirm delivery and update the box label for ongoing correspondence." The concierge, a woman named Maria who had worked the building for 8 years, glanced at me with a small nod of reassurance. Mr. Vaughn presented several pieces of mail postmarked within the last week. Credit card offers, bank promotions, all addressed to Garrett Vaughn at this unit number. He wants to accept them on site to establish receipt. I walked to the counter and placed the deed and trust documents in front of Maria. "The property is solely in my name per recorded trust designation. No occupancy agreement exists. No court order authorizes access or mail acceptance on his behalf." Garrett lifted one of the envelopes, a sealed credit card solicitation. "This is proof of address. I've been using the loft as my mailing address for business purposes. The courier can verify delivery right now." The courier shifted uncomfortably. "I was hired to deliver and witness acceptance. If there's a dispute," Maria interrupted gently. "Condo policy requires legal proof of residency or court authorization for mailbox changes, or mail acceptance in contested situations. Without a lease utility bill in your name or judicial order, we cannot process the label update or allow delivery beyond the lobby." Garrett's tone sharpened. "This is harassment. I have a right to receive my mail." One of the security officers stepped forward. "Sir, civil standby is for keeping the peace during disputed property retrieval or similar. It does not include forcing access to private areas or altering building records. If you wish to receive the mail personally, we can hold it at the desk for you to claim, with proper ID, but no address change, no entry." I met my brother's eyes. "You never lived here. You never had permission. This is an attempt to manufacture evidence of occupancy." Garrett opened his mouth, then closed it when the second officer's radio crackled. "Central, we have activity at the service entrance. Mail subject matching description of Kenneth Vaughn entering with a plastic storage bin. Requesting camera review." The lobby monitor switched to the rear loading dock feed. My father was there, dressed in dark clothes, carrying a clear plastic tote. He glanced around once, then bent to place it near the service door, partially hidden by a delivery cart. Inside the tote, visible for a split second before he covered it, were folded men's shirts, a new razor kit, a stack of sealed envelopes addressed to Garrett at the loft address, postmarks fresh. Security moved fast. One officer spoke into his radio. "Confirm subject placing items at service entrance. Request immediate response team." Maria turned to me. "Ms. Vaughn, do you authorize entry to the service area or acceptance of any items?" "No," I said. "That's trespass and attempted evidence planting." The officers nodded. One headed toward the rear corridor while the other stayed with us. Garrett tried to push past. "That's my father's property, he's just—" "Stand back, sir," the remaining officer said. "No one enters without permission or court order." Minutes later, the rear team reported back via radio. "Subject detained at service entrance. Bin contains clothing, toiletries, and recent mail addressed to Garrett Vaughn at this property, all sealed, no prior opening. Subject claims retrieval of family items. No key or access code provided." Kenneth was escorted back to the lobby, tote in evidence bag held by security. His face was pale, eyes avoiding mine. He looked older than his 65 years in that moment. Garrett rounded on him. "Dad, what the hell?" Kenneth muttered. "I was just helping. Thought if mail was here." I cut in. "You were creating proof he lived here. The cameras caught everything from entry to placement." The lead security officer addressed Kenneth. "Sir, you entered through a restricted service entrance without authorization. Placing items to simulate residency constitutes trespass under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 266, Section 120. We have full video and will file a report with Boston Police if you do not leave immediately. Kenneth looked at me one last time, something close to regret flashing across his face before it hardened. This isn't over. Garrett tried one final plea. Adrienne, come on. We're family. Just let me take the mail. Maria shook her head. Mail will be returned to sender or held pending legal resolution. No acceptance on site. Security escorted both men toward the main doors. Garrett's voice rose as they walked. You'll regret this. We'll get a lawyer. The doors closed behind them. The lobby returned to quiet, only the soft hum of the elevator in the background. I turned to Maria. Please increase security protocols immediately. Additional cameras on service entrances. No unescorted visitors. Mailbox access restricted to verified residents only. She nodded. Already in progress, Ms. Vaughn. Incident report will be filed with the board and Boston PD for record. You're safe here. I took the elevator back upstairs, the folder of documents still in my hand. The loft felt different now, not violated, but fortified. They had tried to force their way in one last time. They had failed. And every step they took only tightened the noose Theodore had tied years ago. A few days later, Victor Lang called with the final determination. The trust administrator had completed the review of all submitted evidence, the forged consent email Kenneth sent to the office, the security footage and incident report from the condo showing attempted evidence planting at the service entrance. Theodore's archived audio recording detailing Garrett's prior forgery attempt on the equity loan, and the trespass documentation filed with Boston Police. The board convened an emergency vote and unanimously enforced the non-contest clause. Victor spoke plainly over the phone. Distributions to Kenneth Vaughn, Patricia Vaughn and Garrett Vaughn are forfeited permanently. Each beneficiary's share, approximately $300,000, was scheduled for phased payout over the next 5 years. That entire amount is now redirected to the alternate remainder beneficiaries. Theodore designated a veterans housing nonprofit in Boston, and the local library foundation he supported quietly for decades. I sat at the kitchen island, the same spot where the party envelopes had first appeared. The number felt abstract yet concrete, $900,000 total money my family had counted on for retirement investments, and Garrett's endless bailouts. Gone. Not returned to them, not redistributed among us, simply removed from the family line entirely. Garrett's reaction came first. He left a voicemail I didn't listen to until the next day, voice cracking with rage, accusing me of ruining his life, demanding I fix this before creditors seized his remaining assets. The startup collapse had already pushed him toward personal bankruptcy. Losing the trust share eliminated any cushion. Banks would no longer extend credit lines once word spread through Boston's financial circles. He was 33, still young enough to recover in theory, but the public fallout from the party guests who had recorded snippets and shared them privately meant his reputation as unreliable was now cemented. My father sent one email. Subject: We need to talk. The body was short. You chose paper over blood. This isn't what Theodore intended. I read it twice, then typed a single reply, the only one I would ever send. Grandpa chose to protect me from greed. I only enforced what he put in writing. After that, I blocked his address, his number, and Patricia's too. No more calls, no more messages. Silence. My mother tried once through a mutual acquaintance from the Back Bay social scene, a woman who had been at the party and witnessed the entire exchange. The acquaintance texted, Patricia asked if you'd meet for coffee. She says it's a misunderstanding. I deleted the message without responding. The upper-class Boston network moves fast. Rumors of the housewarming confrontation had already circulated through dinner parties and charity boards. Friends who had once invited my parents to events now hesitated. Retirement plans built on the trust income evaporated overnight. Kenneth's golf club memberships, Patricia's travel groups. The quiet assumption of financial security all undermined. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching the fallout. Only a quiet certainty that Theodore had seen this coming long before I did. He hadn't written the clause to punish, he wrote it to protect. And it worked. The loft remained mine. No more threats of court filings. The trust's enforcement made any challenge futile. Attorneys would advise against it. The forfeiture risk was too high. Boston police closed the trespass report as a civil matter with no further action, but the record existed. If they tried again, it would escalate. I changed the final service entrance lock myself that afternoon, then scheduled additional cameras at every access point. The building's security team added my unit to priority monitoring. The space felt different now, not haunted by what almost happened, but anchored by what had been defended. In the evenings, I stood on the balcony watching the Charles River lights reflect on the water. The city moved on below cars, crossing the Longfellow Bridge lights in the Prudential Tower, blinking in patterns. My family had lost more than money. They lost the illusion that entitlement could override intent. I lost them. And in that loss, I gained something Theodore had always wanted for me: freedom from the weight of their expectations. The trust administrator sent formal letters confirming the redirection of funds. Veterans housing in Boston would receive the bulk practical support for people who had served and fallen on hard times. The Library Foundation would expand its programs just as Theodore had quietly hoped. It felt fitting. His legacy didn't vanish, it simply bypassed the people who tried to claim it. I kept his audio file on the drive not as a weapon, but as a reminder. He had known. He had acted. And I had finished what he started. I stood on the balcony as the city lights came alive below. The Charles River shimmered under the glow of Boston at night. Bridges tracing silver lines across the water. The Prudential Tower pulsing red and white in the distance. The housewarming party had ended hours earlier. The last guests left with quiet goodbyes and sidelong glances that said they would remember what they had witnessed. The loft was silent now, except for the faint saxophone drifting up from the bar on the street level. Slow, mournful notes that seemed to echo the emptiness inside. The space felt different. Not larger, not colder, just truly mine. No lingering tension from forced smiles or veiled threats. No shadows of betrayal waiting in the corners. The betrayal had come and gone, exposed in front of 200 people, and the consequences had followed like dominoes falling in slow motion. Greed and favoritism can destroy a family faster than any argument or lawsuit. They erode trust quietly, at first small excuses for bad behavior, justifications for unequal treatment, until one day the mask slips completely. In my case, it slipped publicly on the marble table where champagne should have been raised in celebration. My parents and brother believed entitlement trumped intent. They thought a dead man's wishes could be rewritten if the need was great enough. They were wrong. Preparation and evidence are the only real shields against that kind of betrayal. Theodore didn't leave me a loft out of sentiment alone. He left me structured legal documents drafted with precision clauses, written to protect the person who had actually cared for him. Recordings saved to prove what words alone could not. In America, trust law and deed designations safeguard the settler's true intent above all else. Massachusetts courts uphold non-contest provisions when they are clear and voluntary, and forgery on fiduciary documents carries criminal weight. The outcome is often permanent financial loss that ripples for years, social isolation in tight-knit circles, where reputation is currency. My family learned that the hard way. I don't regret holding my ground. Not for a second. Theodore didn't just give me property. He gave me the truth about the people around me. He showed me that blood alone doesn't guarantee loyalty, actions do. He taught me that protecting yourself isn't betrayal, it's survival. And in surviving, I found freedom. The loft is peaceful now. I can walk through the rooms without bracing for the next demand, without wondering who will try to take what isn't theirs. The saxophone faded into the night air. I leaned on the railing, feeling the cool metal under my palms. Below, cars moved steadily across the Longfellow Bridge, lives continuing without pause. Mine would too, stronger, clearer, unburdened. This story isn't about revenge, it's about consequences. Greed doesn't just cost money, it costs relationships, dignity, future security. Favoritism doesn't build families, it fractures them. Legal preparation isn't cold, it's responsible. And sometimes the greatest gift a grandparent can leave isn't wealth, but the clarity to see people for who they really are. If you've faced an inheritance dispute that forced you to cut ties completely, or if you've watched someone close lose everything because they couldn't let go of what wasn't theirs, think about it. What would you do in that moment? Would you bend to keep the peace? Or stand firm to keep your truth? Share in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from family over property or money? What was the breaking point? I'd like to hear your stories. No judgment here, just understanding. If this resonated, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More real stories like this are coming, stories about betrayal, resilience, and the quiet strength it takes to choose yourself. Thank you for listening all the way through. Until next time.